The restaurant was a small, candlelit place tucked between shuttered antique stores and the fogged windows of a flower shop long past its bloom. Clarissa had picked it. Of course she had. She always did the choosing. Meals, music, memories. Julian admired her poise across the table. Her silver earrings caught the low amber light each time she tilted her head, smiling just enough, sipping the Bordeaux just right. The tablecloth was white, pristine. Her lipstick left a perfect print on the rim of her glass. 10 years, she said softly. Hard to believe, isn't it? Julian nodded, swallowing a lump that wasn't wine. Feels like 20, he meant to joke. It came out dry and flat. Clarissa didn't flinch. She only reached for her fork, slicing into the duck confit with surgical precision. Outside, rain started. Inside, heat clung to the air like a film. Julian's collar, starched and tight, stuck to his neck. He loosened it with 2 fingers, grateful for the distraction. Something in his chest pinched. I still remember our first date, Clarissa said, twirling her fork thoughtfully. You spilled champagne all over the waiter's shoes. Julian smiled, but it hurt. A tight, sharp feeling dug beneath his ribs. His vision shimmered at the edges. That was a good night, he said, voice thin. The room tilted slightly. She didn't look up. Was it? The question hung in the air, unanswered. A bead of sweat trickled from Julian's temple. He blinked hard. The flicker of candles multiplied, swam across the white cloth like ghosts. Clarissa set down her fork. You don't look well. He tried. The word stuck. His tongue felt thick, clumsy. He clutched the edge of the table. His wineglass tipped, spilled red across the cloth, blooming like a wound. He stared at it, fascinated. Clarissa didn't move. Julian, she said. Not loudly, not with panic. Just the way she might ask a waiter for the check. His breath hitched. His chest refused to expand. His vision tunneled into shadow. A cold wave crashed through his body. He slid sideways off his chair. Chairs scraped. A voice, was it hers, called for help. Footsteps thundered past, shouts echoed in the tight space. But in the chaos, Clarissa remained a still point. Her hands folded in her lap, her lips pressed in a pale line. She watched, eyes unreadable, as strangers surrounded him. Then, sirens, harsh light, a mask over his face, the tang of antiseptic and metal. The world blurred into fragments, white ceiling tiles, fluorescent light buzzing like a wasp, a curtain rail. An IV drip. Julian's eyes fluttered open, then shut again as pain fired through his chest like a warning shot. A nurse's voice drifted through. BP's stabilized. He's lucky. Could have been worse. Another voice. Cooler. Calmer. Clarissa's. Yes, it could have. She was near. He could feel her presence, though he couldn't turn his head. Her perfume, something floral and cold, drifted faintly in the air. He tried to speak, but no sound came, just the steady beep of the heart monitor beside him, counting the seconds between what was and what would never be again. Something had cracked open, not just in his body, in the space between them. And though Julian lay surrounded by machines and medicine, what chilled him most was the memory of her face, calm and composed as he fell. No fear, no panic, just observation, as though she'd been waiting, as though she'd known. The world came back in pieces. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The low hum of machines. A plastic taste on Julian's tongue. Pain, dull and insistent, throbbed behind his ribs. He blinked, slowly, each flutter of his eyelids scraping against exhaustion. When his vision cleared, he saw the hospital room, white, sterile, hushed. Then he saw the chart at the foot of the bed. Toxicology. Pending results. Suspected ingestion of foreign compound. The words swam before his eyes. He turned his head, gingerly, to the tray beside him. A plastic pitcher of water, a cup, a single pink rose in a thin glass vase, a card tucked behind it, her handwriting, elegant and slanted. Rest. We'll talk when you're stronger. See, Julian's mouth went dry. A knock. Then the door opened, and 2 men stepped inside. Detectives, by their posture alone. Not nurses, not doctors. One was tall and pale, the other broad with tired eyes. They moved like they'd done this before. Mr. Hawthorne, the broad one said. Glad to see you awake. Julian nodded slow. His throat was a desert. "We're just here to ask a few questions about the evening you were brought in." Julian hesitated. Was it a heart attack?" They exchanged a glance. "There are signs that suggest otherwise," said the taller detective. "The doctors found traces of aconite in your system. Do you know what that is?" He didn't, but the name chilled him. "Wolfsbane," the man continued. "A rare poison, not something you pick up by accident." Julian stared past them, his thoughts splintering. The dinner, the wine, the way Clarissa hadn't panicked, hadn't even moved. "Did you eat or drink anything unusual?" the other detective asked. "Anything you didn't prepare yourself?" A long pause. "Yes," Julian whispered. "My wife ordered for both of us." He didn't say more. He couldn't. Not yet. But the seed had been planted. A slow, creeping realization that gnawed at the edges of his reason. Clarissa had known. Her calm wasn't concern. It was control. As the detectives continued their questions, Julian answered, his voice steadier now. But inside, something began to unravel. 10 years of shared life reframed in a single instant. The woman who once held his hand now haunted his thoughts. He wasn't just recovering. He was awakening to a different reality. One where love might have been the deadliest deception of all. Julian was discharged with instructions to rest, avoid stress, and follow up with his cardiologist. None of that happened. Back at home, the silence was too loud. Clarissa moved through their modern, minimalistic house like a ghost, graceful and cold. She made soup, fluffed pillows, checked in on him with all the mechanical efficiency of a nurse on a shift she didn't want. She didn't ask about the detectives. He didn't bring them up. A truce of pretense settled between them, but behind his eyes, Julian was wide awake. He waited until she left for her afternoon yoga class, Thursdays at 2 o'clock, always, and began digging. He started with their shared office. Her laptop was locked, but not well. She never believed he'd care enough to snoop. Within an hour, he had found the first oddity, a series of wire transfers from their joint investment account to an unfamiliar entity, Westridge Consulting. 10,000, then 20, then 50. He pulled bank statements. Half of them were scanned PDFs she'd handled. Most bore a forged version of his signature, so close to his handwriting that it made his skin crawl. She hadn't even tried to disguise the rhythm of the forgery. She assumed he'd never look. But now, he was looking at everything. He searched her email next. The correspondence with Westridge was buried under folders labeled innocuously: receipts, travel, wellness. Inside, he found cleaned-up conversations between Clarissa and someone named Annika West. Annika West. The name jumped off the screen like a trap snapping shut. She was no consultant. Julian quickly found a photo of her on a social media account Clarissa had tried to delete, but forgot to unlink. Young, sharp-eyed, familiar in an uncomfortable way. She'd once attended one of their charity galas. Julian remembered her laughing with Clarissa by the piano. A shared past, a hidden present. Julian copied everything: email threads, bank files, images. He created an encrypted backup and uploaded it to a cloud drive only he controlled. He wasn't just gathering evidence now, he was building a case. He didn't feel anger, he felt clarity. Each file was a thread, and the tapestry they'd woven together for a decade was unraveling in his hands. The marriage, the routines, the stability. It was all engineered. The poison, he realized, hadn't just been in his bloodstream. It had been in his life for years, drip-fed in silent betrayals. And now, he was no longer a husband recovering from an attack. He was a man staging a counterattack. When Clarissa returned, she breezed into the room carrying a green smoothie, kissed his cheek lightly, and asked if he wanted to sit outside. Her timing was always precise. Her voice, the same soft lilt he once adored. He smiled. "I think I'll rest a little longer," he said. "Maybe later." She left him alone. Julian stared at the screen of his laptop, Annika West's name still glowing faintly in the corner. She wasn't the end of the trail. She was the beginning. It wasn't much. A quiet phone call, late one evening. The voice on the other end was hesitant, unsure. But there was a rawness to it that caught Julian's attention. I I need to talk to you about what happened the other night, the woman said. I'm Aisha. I was the waitress at the restaurant. Julian's pulse quickened. He recognized the name immediately. I was the one who served you and your wife, the wine. Her words faltered. I saw her. I saw her pour something into your glass. It wasn't the wine. It was something else. Aisha paused, breathing shakily on the other end of the line. I'm sorry, she whispered. I thought she was just giving you the best she could. But when you fell, when you collapsed, I saw her face, Mr. Hawthorne. I saw her look at you like you were just a problem to solve. Julian's mind raced. He felt an odd calmness spreading over him. Everything, every instinct, every detail he had ignored for so long suddenly clicked into place. Are you sure? He asked, his voice tight, though he wasn't sure if it was from disbelief or something else. Aisha's voice shook. Yes, I didn't know what to do, so I told myself maybe I was wrong. But when I saw the police, I knew. It was her. She did it on purpose. The truth hung in the air, thick and unbearable. Julian let the words settle. Aisha wasn't just an eyewitness. She was his first real anchor in a storm of deceit. Her courage to come forward had cracked open the case, and for the first time in days, he felt a small flicker of clarity. I'm sorry it took so long to tell you, Aisha continued, but I thought you should know. I couldn't live with myself. I appreciate it, Julian said, voice low but steady. Thank you, Aisha. As he hung up, Julian exhaled sharply, his mind still processing. He realized someone had been watching him. Someone had known, and they had waited, long enough for him to collapse, long enough to make sure he didn't die. Now, he was waiting for answers of his own. The hospital room smelled sterile, the air stale with antiseptic. Julian stood at the door of room 306, his hands clenched at his sides. Behind the door, Clarissa lay in the bed, calm, unbothered, as if nothing had ever happened. Her hair was combed neatly, a few stray strands framing her face. She looked almost serene. As he stepped inside, her eyes flicked up from the magazine she had been reading. The corners of her lips lifted, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was no surprise, no real emotion, only a cool detachment. Julian, she said, her voice light, as though they were meeting for the first time. I didn't expect you to come here. He didn't speak at first. His chest tightened, but he forced himself to remain still. He could hear the steady beep of the heart monitor beside her, feel the weight of the moment settle in his bones. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was the unraveling of everything. Finally, Julian spoke, his voice calm, controlled. I know what you did. Clarissa's lips pressed together, her eyes narrowing slightly, but there was no panic, just calculation. What are you talking about? She asked, as if she hadn't heard him. The wine, he continued, stepping closer, the distance between them closing with each word. Aisha came forward. She saw you. Clarissa's expression flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. She didn't answer, only waited, as if she were giving him the space to make his own conclusions. You poisoned me, Clarissa, Julian said quietly, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. You tried to kill me. For the first time, something close to frustration flashed in her eyes. You don't understand, she said, her voice losing its earlier calm, shifting into something else. A controlled panic. This wasn't supposed to happen, You only what? He interrupted. What? Kill me? Make sure I was out of the way? Her breath caught in her throat, but she recovered quickly. You don't get it. It was for us, Julian, for us. You were always so busy, you never saw how much I did, how much I gave. Julian's gaze hardened. Don't try to justify this. She sat up, her hands gripping the bed's edge, her eyes cold. You wouldn't listen to me. You wouldn't see it. Everything I did for you. The words rang hollow in the sterile room. Julian remained silent for a long moment, the weight of it all settling on his chest like a stone. The woman who had once been his world, who he thought he knew, was a stranger now. Everything we had, he said, voice low and devoid of emotion, was a lie. I can't be part of it anymore. Without another word, Julian turned and walked out. He didn't look back. As he stepped into the hallway, the sound of her voice faded into nothing. The door clicked shut behind him, and in that moment, everything had changed. The world erupted around him. The day after Julian's confrontation with Clarissa, the media exploded. Headlines screamed in bold letters across every news outlet. Husband poisoned by wife, a decade of deception. Rumors spread faster than wildfire. The internet had a field day, dissecting every angle of his marriage, finding patterns in his life that he'd never noticed before. Was he really oblivious? Had he been so blind, so trusting? Journalists called. A swarm of interviews were scheduled, but Julian didn't answer the phone. He ignored the public's prying eyes and the flashing cameras outside his window. His lawyer told him to stay out of the spotlight, but it wasn't the press he feared. It was the flood of attention, the constant hum of speculation, the feeling of being watched, judged. He retreated into silence. His home, once a sanctuary, now felt suffocating. The walls pressed in. Memories of laughter, quiet evenings, and tender words from Clarissa seemed like shadows from someone else's life. He couldn't find peace, so he moved. He rented a small, unfurnished apartment on the outskirts of the city. No media, no distractions, just emptiness. He filled the sterile space with what few possessions he hadn't thrown away. Books, a few clothes, a single lamp. The silence was deafening. The sound of his own breathing felt louder than anything else. But it wasn't just the silence that consumed him. The weight of loss, of identity was heavier. Who was Julian Hawthorne without Clarissa, without the facade they'd built together? He had no answers, no direction. Just a blur of faces from his past that now seemed distant, fragmented. Was he even the person he used to be? He spent hours staring at the city skyline, wondering if he could ever be whole again. It was Marlene, his younger sister, who finally broke through. She showed up unannounced one rainy Saturday afternoon. Her presence was quiet, unassuming, a relief after weeks of isolation. She didn't bombard him with questions or try to dissect his life. Instead, she took off her coat, hung it in the hall, and went straight to the kitchen like she had 100 times before. "Thought you might want something other than takeout," she said, already chopping vegetables. Julian watched her, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't ask how he was. She didn't need to. Marlene had always been a grounding force. She had been the one who visited him in college when he'd locked himself in his dorm room, the one who listened when he was uncertain about his career. And now, she was the one quietly pulling him from the void. She made soup, simple, wholesome, just the way their mother had. The steam filled the apartment, cutting through the heaviness of the silence. As she stirred the pot, Julian sat down at the small table watching her. He noticed the easy rhythm of her movements. Her calmness was contagious. Her presence felt like a lifeline in a storm. "Remember when we were kids?" she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "And you'd always get lost in those books about adventure? Always dreaming about bigger things?" He nodded, his mind briefly flickering to those days of wide-eyed optimism. Back then, the world felt so full of possibility. "But you were always so sure of things back then, Jules," Marlene continued, setting the bowl of soup in front of him. "What happened?" His throat tightened. The memory of his past self, the man he'd once been, was a painful reminder of how far he'd strayed. "I didn't see it," he said, his voice low. "I let myself be blind to what was right in front of me. I thought love would fix everything. But it didn't." Marlene sat down across from him, her expression softening. "Love doesn't fix things," she said quietly, "but it can help you find your way back when you've lost yourself." Julian swallowed, the realization settling in his chest like a stone. He had been blinded by the idea of love, by his desire to maintain the image of a perfect life. It had cost him everything. And now, in the quiet of the kitchen, with Marlene's steady presence grounding him, he knew that this was the beginning of his recovery. Not just from the betrayal, but from the person he had become, the person who had allowed his vision to be clouded. The first step in healing was accepting that the journey to rediscovery would start with himself. The courtroom felt cold. The air hung heavy, thick with expectation. Julian sat at the defendant's table, his lawyer beside him, trying to focus on the proceedings. The noise from the reporters outside the courtroom was muffled, but it still gnawed at him. It was as if the entire world had paused to watch this moment, the unraveling of a marriage, the fall of a woman he once trusted. Clarissa sat at the other side of the room, perfectly composed, her back straight, and her face as smooth and impassive as it had always been. Not once did her gaze flicker toward him. Her eyes remained fixed on the ceiling, as though pretending he wasn't there. As though pretending she hadn't poisoned him, hadn't betrayed him in ways that cut deeper than any physical wound. Her lawyer, a man with perfectly manicured hair and an air of practiced confidence, began his argument. His voice was slick, practiced. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence presented is circumstantial. There is no clear motive, no definitive proof that Mrs. Hawthorne intended to harm her husband. What we are dealing with is an unfortunate event, a series of misunderstandings, a tragic accident. The defense painted Clarissa as the victim, the woman who had only tried to care for her husband, to create a perfect life. They weaved a narrative of Julian's supposed heart problems, suggesting he had overreacted to stress, that his medical condition might have caused his collapse on its own. They made Clarissa out to be a devoted wife, overwhelmed by the pressures of their life together. But Julian didn't need to listen. He knew the truth. He'd already seen it all in the evidence. Bank transfers, emails, the toxicology report. Every thread of their marriage, every lie, every poisoned moment was laid bare. The prosecutor stood and countered with the undeniable. The poison in his system had been carefully administered. The documents were clear. The altered bank statements, the forged signatures. Clarissa's involvement was no longer a theory. It was a reality. The judge banged the gavel, declaring the trial confirmed. The room fell into a heavy silence. Clarissa didn't flinch. Julian didn't look away. It was late one night, the city outside his apartment as quiet as his thoughts, when a single envelope appeared beneath his door. The paper was thin, its edges slightly frayed. He bent down and picked it up, immediately recognizing the handwriting on the front. Aisha. He sat on the couch, tearing the envelope open with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The letter inside was short, but every word weighed heavily. Julian, I hope this letter finds you in better spirits than I was when I saw what happened. I've spent so many days wondering if I did the right thing, coming forward like I did. It's been hard watching everything unravel, but I want you to know that I'm glad I told you the truth. It wasn't easy, but I couldn't live with the silence anymore. After I spoke to you, things got worse. I was offered hush money. They said if I kept quiet, I could walk away, forget everything, but I couldn't. My conscience wouldn't let me. But there's something else. I don't know if you're aware, but Annika West, the woman your wife was corresponding with, was more involved than you think. She wasn't just some outsider. She was working with Clarissa from the beginning, pulling strings, handling the finances, making sure everything went according to plan. The thing is, I'm not the only one who's seen the evidence. Annika's fingerprints are all over this, and I fear she's only the tip of the iceberg. Please, be careful. There's more to this than you can imagine. I know you're angry. I know you feel betrayed. But what matters now is the truth. You deserve that much, at least. Please, don't let them win. You can still make it right. With gratitude, Aisha. Julian sat in stunned silence, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. Gratitude, courage. Aisha had risked everything, and in doing so, she had given him more than just evidence. She had given him the clarity he needed. Annika West was no longer just a name on an email. She was a figure at the heart of this web. And Aisha's revelation, that there was more to this than he had ever realized, sent a chill down his spine. But there was a fire, too. He couldn't walk away now. He wouldn't. Not when there was more to uncover. He knew what he had to do. He was done being passive. The time for action had come. And this time, he wasn't going to let the silence or the lie. A few weeks had passed since Aisha's letter, and Julian had thought about it every day. He couldn't shake the feeling that her courage had changed something inside of him, had given him the resolve to move forward. She had given him the truth. But more than that, she had shown him a path, one that didn't just end in bitterness or vengeance, but in growth, action, and rebuilding. One afternoon, Julian invited Aisha to meet him at a small cafe downtown. He had come to appreciate the simplicity of places like this. Quiet corners, the hum of background conversations, a little bit of space to think. The city outside was bustling, but in here, time seemed to slow. Aisha arrived promptly, still wearing the modest clothes she had worn the day he'd met her. Her face was more confident now, though. There was a newfound calmness in her eyes, a clarity that made her seem older than her years. She sat down across from him, a hesitant smile tugging at her lips. "You wanted to talk?" Julian nodded, leaning forward, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "I've been thinking about what you said, about Annika, about everything." He paused, watching her eyes, making sure she knew this wasn't just a conversation about the past. It was about the future. "I want to offer you something," he said, surprising himself. "An internship. You've got the drive, the insight. You don't need to hide anymore. I think you could do something bigger than all this." Aisha blinked, taken aback. What?" "I want you to come work with me, to help me build something." Julian smiled. "A foundation. One focused on truth, on helping people like you who might be afraid to speak out." Her expression softened, gratitude and disbelief merging in her eyes. "Why? After everything? Why me?" "Because you showed me what's really important," Julian said, his voice steady. "It's not about drama or revenge, it's about truth. You gave me the courage to look beyond myself, and I want to do that for others too. We can make something meaningful out of this mess." As the words sank in, he added, "I'm also starting a scholarship initiative, in your name, to help young women who feel like they don't have a voice, who feel trapped in their situations." Aisha's eyes welled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away. "You don't have to do that." "I do," Julian said softly. "I want to, and I think it's the right thing to do." Aisha nodded slowly, a smile breaking through her surprise. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just keep being you." Julian paused, his smile genuine. "Together, we can build something good out of this." The courtroom was quieter now, the weight of the trial having settled into a tense, expectant silence. The final day of proceedings had arrived, the sentencing. The jury had found Clarissa guilty of poisoning Julian, but the sentencing was always the hardest part. There was always that lingering question: how much justice would truly be served? Clarissa stood at the podium, her lawyer beside her. She looked composed, her expression still unreadable, like a woman who had lost everything but still refused to bend. Julian could hardly bring himself to look at her, but he felt a strange detachment in the air between them. This wasn't about her anymore. The judge's gavel came down. The room went still. "Clarissa Hawthorne, you are hereby sentenced to probation with no jail time," the judge declared. There was a murmur in the courtroom, the sound of disappointment rising from the audience. The media had painted her as a villain, and the public wanted retribution. They wanted to see her suffer, to feel the consequences of her actions. But Julian wasn't surprised. He had known deep down that punishment wasn't the answer. He had already found his peace. Clarissa's eyes never met his. She didn't even glance his way as she turned to leave, escorted by her lawyer. She was moving on, as if this was just another chapter she could close. For Julian, there was no satisfaction in the outcome. There was no sense of justice in her lack of punishment, but there was peace. His peace. As he walked out of the courtroom, Julian caught sight of Clarissa in the hallway, her back turned, her steps purposeful and unhurried. It was almost as if nothing had changed for her, but for him, everything had. They passed each other silently. No words, no anger, just the weight of shared history. And for the first time, Julian realized that letting go didn't mean anything had been lost. He had freed himself from the chains of a life built on lies, and he was ready to rebuild, not for revenge, not for justice, but for truth. He walked away, leaving the past behind, stepping into a future of his own making. Julian stood in the doorway of his office. The familiar sight of the sleek furniture, the glass walls, the perfectly arranged stacks of papers. All of it was just as he remembered. The firm was intact, the machinery of business humming in the background as though nothing had changed. But everything had. He had been to hell and back in the past year, and what stood before him now wasn't the same man who had walked into this office with ambition and certainty. That man was gone, and in his place stood someone different, someone quieter, more aware of the fragility of everything he had once taken for granted. He moved slowly into the room, his footsteps soft on the carpet as he glanced around. There were no signs of the chaos he had experienced. The walls, the bookshelves, the polished desk, all were untouched by the storm of his personal life. But the quiet in the office felt different now. It wasn't the cold, hollow quiet he had grown used to during his time alone in his apartment. No, this was a different kind of stillness, one he was ready to embrace. Julian took a seat at his desk, pulling a drawer open. Inside was the framed letter from Aisha, tucked beneath a stack of documents. He hadn't put it in a drawer out of shame or guilt. No, it was there because he hadn't been ready to look at it, not until now. But now, as he reached for the letter, he understood its significance. It wasn't just a letter. It was a reminder, a symbol of everything he had lost, everything he had fought for, and everything he had yet to build. He carefully removed it from the drawer and placed it on the desk. The words written in Aisha's careful handwriting spoke to him in a way that no legal document, no corporate report ever had. It was the truth that had pulled him from the edge, the truth that had given him the strength to begin again. Without hesitation, he picked up a frame and slid the letter inside. It was small, humble, but perfect in its simplicity. He set it on his desk, next to his computer, so that it was the first thing he saw when he sat down. Julian smiled to himself. He had been through so much to get here, and now he was finally ready to create again. Not with the same drive that had once consumed him, but with a purpose that felt real. This wasn't just about success anymore. It was about building something that mattered. A new kind of quiet had settled over him, a quiet of clarity, of truth, and it was enough. For the first time in a long while, Julian felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be.